Well, do you remember what I said about hoodie season? Yeah, it's 90 degrees out in Texas, typical Texas weather. But anyway, it is Saturday. That means it's time for a $365 tournament here at Texas Card House Dallas. 30K starting stack, 30-minute levels, 30K guarantee. So this is a great structure for a one-day tournament. I think I've cashed it once before, but let's make a final table. Let's make a fun run today, and I'll see you guys inside. I am so excited to be back on the tournament scene after a little bit of a break, and today I am at Texas Card House Dallas to play in the $365 Big One one-day tournament. Like I said, this is an awesome structure for a one-day tournament with a 30K starting stack, 30-minute levels, and a $30,000 guaranteed prize pool. I have some fun and interesting hands to share with you guys today. I'm super excited to get into it. Let's play some hands. I received my tournament stack of 30,000, and the blinds have now gone up from 400, 800, 800 to 500, 1,000, 1,000, and my stack in the big blind is 25,000. In this vlog, you're going to hear me talk about two opponents quite often, both of them very, very loose pre-flop. One of them is very loose passive and the other one is very loose aggressive, but they like to limp and see a lot of flops. So in this case, the hijack and the cutoff, both of those players limp. The small blind limps as well, and then I look down at pocket kings in the big blind, a great hand to wake up with in this spot. However, we are out of position. At this time, I didn't know how loose this table was and how call happy they were pre-flop, but I still need to size up in this limped pot. Being out of position, and of course having a very strong hand, I make it 8 big blinds or 8,000 tournament chips. Sadly, we didn't get the result we wanted to get heads up with one of our opponents as they fold, which after playing with them for hours after this hand, the fact that they all folded was kind of mind-boggling. But we're always happy to pick up some big blinds, and we're gonna move on to the next one. In this hand, there's not a ton to talk about, but I did want to highlight our calling range in this spot where we're 30 big blinds effective and our villain raises from early position to 2.5 big blinds or 2,500. It folds around to me in the small blind and I look down at pocket fours. As you can see, we're going to be flatting all of our small pocket pairs in this spot and we're going to be jamming some of our bigger ones, but the pocket fours is just a pure call as we want to try and flop a set and win a big pot. So I call, the big blind calls as well, and we are going to go 3 ways to a flop of ace, queen, jack, rainbow. So sadly, no set for us. We check it over to the original raiser. He bets 3,200. We're gonna fold, but it is important to note at a stack size of about 30 big blinds, don't be afraid to call with your small pocket pairs as you do have the right price to try and set mine. In this hand, the blinds are 600, 1,200, 1,200, and I have a stack of 26,800. There's a raise from the hijack to 3,000, and the cutoff makes the call, which has been a common theme at this table so far. It folds around to me in the big blind, and I look down at pocket tens. I have just over 22 big blinds, a great stack size to put in a jam. We can force some hands to fold that have a lot of equity against us, for example, like King Jack offsuit. But if our opponent has a hand like Ace King, Ace Queen suited, we're happy to head off to the races as we can win a very nice pot. And then if our opponent makes the call with a hand like pocket 8s or 9s, then we are in great shape. So I jam all in for 26,800 chips. My opponent finds the call, and here's what happened. There's not much to sweat in this one as we flop a set of 10s and we hold against Ace King and now have over 45 big blinds in this tournament. In this hand, we get into a very interesting spot that I was happy to review and study later, where the low jack, one of those loose passive players I was telling you about, he limps. It folds around to me in the small blind and I look down at Ace Queen of clubs. A very nice hand. I'm going to put in a raise, so I make it 3,600. No surprise here as the low jack puts in the call, and so we're going to go heads up to a flop of King Jack 5 with 1 club. As you can see, our hand purely wants to bet. We flop a gut shot and a backdoor flush draw. We have range advantage on this king high board. When we bet here, our opponent isn't going to raise us too often, and we can get some of his hands with a little bit of equity to fold. However, against this opponent, I don't expect him to fold quite yet, but that's okay because we can continue aggression on later streets if needed. So my opponent does indeed make the call, so we're going to head to a turn card, which is a 7 of clubs, so now our club flush draw comes in. In real time, I knew that we had a couple options here between betting or checking. As you can see, it's really close between betting about half pot and checking. Because we pick up so much equity, we have all options on the table. So I do decide to check, obviously planning on never folding, and then my opponent bets 8,000 or a little less than 7 big blinds. So this was the spot that I wasn't sure about, and after reviewing it, we can actually jam or just call here. It's almost a coin flip because we have so much equity as we're getting closer and closer to the money. So I decided to go with the lower variance route and put in the call, hoping that we can improve by the river. Unfortunately for us, the river is the 8 of hearts, so we completely brick out. When we check to our opponent on the turn, he can definitely start putting in bluffs here. He could have a hand like Queen 10, Ace 10, Queen 9, something like that. So our ace high can be good here some of the time, so I check and then my opponent deliberates for a little bit and then lands on a check as well. I table my hand and my opponent flips over pocket nines. It's kind of a weird spot because our hand did improve so much when the turn card came, so our hand wasn't one that I necessarily felt like I needed to blast off and turn into a bluff. But if we didn't have the ace queen of clubs on that board, I probably would have heavily considered just bombing and probably getting it in by the river. My opponent was very sticky, so I decided to play this pretty passive out of position, and that's totally fine. However, if we asserted aggression, we probably would have got his hand to fold by the river, but we whiff and we're gonna move on to the next one. In this hand, under the gun player limps, and it folds around to me in the low jack, and I look down at ace 4 spades. Normally, I would just be raising this hand a ton of the time, but because of how sticky and call happy this table's been pre-flop, I decide to just call. We're gonna go 4 ways to a flop of ace 10 8 with 2 diamonds. The under the gun player then bets 3,500. Even though we flop top pair, I'm not loving it, but it feels so wrong to fold to just one bet, so I make the call. Then, sure enough, the small blind puts in a raise. The under the gun player calls, so then I have to sadly put in the fold. I was really regretting my decision limping pre-flop, should have put in a raise to give us better navigation post-flop. The very next hand, I'm in the low jack, it folds around to me, and I look down at queen jack offsuit. This one's definitely going to be an open, so I raise to 2,400. The cutoff makes the call, and then the button, who's a very competent, more aggressive player, he puts in the 3-bet to 8,500. After I look this spot up with our effective stack sizes, we aren't going to have a flatting range at the stack depth because of the other player who called to our left, so we're just going to have folds or jams, and obviously this hand is just a fold, so we're going to move on to the next one. Sadly, after a few unlucky spots, our stack is now down to 32,700 and blinds have moved up to 1,000, 1,500, 1,500. And in this hand, I'm in the hijack and look down at pocket kings. I'm gonna raise it up to 3,500. The big blind, the player who's been in so many pots with me, he makes the call. A big shocker there. We're gonna go heads up to a flop of jack 3 deuce with 2 clubs, so a seemingly great flop for our hand. He checks it over to us and our hand is so good and our stack size is not that big, so we can bet small here and still get our stack in reasonably by the river. So I bet a very small amount of 2,000. My opponent makes the call, no shocker there, and so we're going to head to the turn, which is a 9 of hearts. My opponent checks yet again. Now we want to bet a size where we can shove all in on almost all safe river cards. So I bet 8,000. My opponent thinks for a little bit and then makes the call yet again. So now we are going to head to the river, which is an offsuit 3, a seemingly amazing card for our hand. So now we have set ourselves up for a nice river size jam of around 19,000. So we're gonna follow through with our plan and go all in. My opponent goes deep into the tank. I'm not sure exactly what he has. I feel like with the player type that he is, if he had a jack, he would have called already. So maybe he had something like middle pair. He thinks and thinks and thinks and finally lands on a fold. So sad for us, we don't get max value. However, I like the way I played the hand, setting us up for a river jam against an opponent who does not like to fold. So that hand really boosted us up and now we have almost 50,000 chips. In this hand, I get to play a fun one where I look down at ace 4 of spades under the gun. I raise it up to 3,000 and only the big blind calls and he has been playing very snug. We head to a flop of king jack 10 with 2 spades, so we flop the nut flush draw. My opponent checks it over to me. And this is a very wet and dynamic board. We do have position and a lot of equity given our nut flush draw. My opponent calling out of the big blind is going to show up to this flop so wide because he's calling a very wide range pre-flop. He's gonna have a lot of very weak 10x, jack x, and king x holdings on this board. Sure, my opponent can have some 2 pairs and straights, but we do have position and we flop a lot of equity against an opponent who is pretty tight. So I'm gonna bet small, I bet 3,000, and my opponent makes the call. The turn is the 6 of clubs, now bringing a double flush draw on board. My opponent checks it over to me, and now, at the time, I thought that this was a great candidate to start putting max pressure. We do have a range advantage and a lot of equity and position against a player who should have a lot of weak pair holdings. But after studying the spot, it looks like the solver wants to bet with our non-flush draw ace 4 suited, and then check all of our ace 4s that have the nut flush draw at a pure 100% frequency. So this was very interesting to me. However, solvers are
are accounting for us playing against perfect players, and in this case we are definitely not playing against perfect players. So exploitatively, I decide to continue barreling here, put max pressure on my opponent, get him to fold a lot of his weak 10x, Jack X, and possibly some King X hands by the river. So I put in a bet of 10,000. My opponent thinks for quite a while and then lands on a fold, so we get the bluff through with our ace high against the big blind. In this hand, blinds are still 1,000, 1,500, 1,500, and I have a stack of 54,200 to start the hand. Under the gun raises to 3,000, and then the loose, call happy player in the hijack puts in a call. I make the call in the big blind with ace 7 of clubs, and we're going to go 3 ways to a flop of 10, 9, 10. The flop, interestingly enough, checks around, so we are going to head to a turn card, which is an ace. Even though I make a pair here, I'm not going to bet it, being out of position, so I check. The under the gun player checks, and now the hijack puts in a bet of 4,000. Well, we've made a pair of aces. We're not going anywhere, so I put in the call. The under the gun player calls as well, so now we're heading to a river, which is an offsuit 8. We check it over to the loose player in the hijack, and he bets 11,500. This bet size is a little less than 8 big blinds. The thing about my opponent is I've seen him value bet hands that in theory should not be betting rivers. Hands like second pair, third pair, not sure if he's trying to bet them for value or turning them into bluffs. So it's very hard to decide here if my opponent has a very strong hand that has me beat, or if he's overvaluing a hand that he shouldn't, or if he does have some bluffs. For example, is a hand like 8-7, if he turned a pair of 8s on the river into a bluff. I could also see him doing this with a hand like a 9x holding, for example. If he has value, my opponent is repping a better ace than me or a 10. I'm even chopping with a ton of his ace-x hands like ace-3, ace-4, ace-5, etc. So I think we can go either way between a call or a fold. It just depends on if I think my opponent will bet a worse hand for value and have some bluffs. And at the time I thought the answer was yes, so I flicked in the call. The under the gun player folds, and I light 11,500 chips on fire as my opponent has 9-10 offsuit. Sadly, after that hand, our stack is at 36,500. We are now headed to break and end of registration. The prize pool reached a total of $42,900, with first place being $8,280. There was 143 players that entered, and we are down to 56, and 17 players will make the money.
All right, well, we were patient and then found a great spot to double up, but unfortunately after that, just can't get over that hump. Win some pots and then lose some, and get ourselves in some tricky spots like with the ace queen of clubs. I'm not sure I loved how I played that one, but either way, we're still in the game. We have a little over starting stack, so let's see if we can get something going.
In this hand, 2 of the super loose players pre-flop limp in the hijack and the cutoff once again. I look down at ace-4 of spades in the small blind. I have about 16 big blinds, and I think this is a great spot to put in a jam. We have enough big blinds to get a ton of hands to fold, especially in this field where people are going to overfold hands that they should be calling with pre-flop. And if we get called by a hand like king queen, queen 10, king jack, something like that, well, we're happy to take the spot. And by ripping here, we also get a lot of better ace-x hands to fold, hands that my opponents might limp with, like ace-8 offsuit, ace-9 offsuit. So I rip, and once I do, my opponent to my left in the big blind immediately looks very upset, like he was going to shove, and I took his move away from him. So obviously it's very highly likely he has a way better hand than us, so at this point I'm hoping he'll put in the fold, but with all of his hemming and hawing, it made it very likely that he was going to toss his cards in. Sure enough, he does think for a little bit and then begrudgingly throws his hand into the muck. My other opponents fold as well, so now we pick up a very healthy pot without having to see all 5 cards, and now we're back up to over 20 big blinds. In the very next hand, it folds around to the cutoff, who again has been playing pretty snug, but a bit frustrated it seems, as he's probably just been very card dead. He raises to 4,500, the blinds are 1,000, 2,000, 2,000, and I have a stack of about 40,000. I look down next to act on the button at ace king offsuit, a super premium hand. With 20 bigs and nearing the soft bubble, we're gonna shove for all of our chips. If he folds, we pick up about 5 big blinds. If he calls, we're probably either flipping or have him absolutely crushed, so all of those are good results for us as we're trying to run deep in this tournament. So I go all in for about 20 big blinds. My opponent snap calls, and here's what happened. Our opponent hits a 10 on the flop. I'm absolutely crushed, as we had our opponent absolutely dominated, but luckily for us, we had the ace of diamonds. It runs out 4 diamonds, and we flush him out and end up doubling up massive here in this tournament. Right before this hand, I had lost a small blind versus big blind hand, so I have about 75,000 to start this hand. The loose player in early position limps yet again, and I'm on the button and look down at the beautiful Queen Jack of Diamonds. I raise it up to 7,000 as blinds are 1,500, 3,000, 3,000. My opponent makes the call, so we're going to head to a flop of Ace, Queen, 8 with 1 diamond. My opponent checks it over to me, and I think there's merit to checking or betting here. It really depends on the player you're playing against, and at this point, with this type of player, I decided to check. The turn is the 7 of spades, and now my opponent bets 6,000. We're definitely not doing anything other than calling, so I make the call and we're headed to a river card, which is the 10 of spades, bringing in a backdoor flush. And now my opponent bets 13,500. I really don't like this bet by my opponent. I'm beat by a lot of holdings. However, I thought as played, because I checked the flop, I should be calling a lot of river cards, but probably not this card specifically. It does bring in some stuff, some bluffs, and some 2 pairs, but again, against this opponent, I still think I am ahead of a lot of hands he might try to bluff with, and I do flick in the call, and my opponent flips over Jack 9 offsuit. So I was right in the sense that my opponent would start bluffing on the turn if I check, and also that he would probably be bluffing this river as well, but he happened to just get there with his gutter. So unfortunately, I have to donate some more chips to my opponent, and we get owned in this hand. I would have preferred to just fold here and pick a better spot, especially nearing the money bubble, and saving my chips for a better spot. Alright everybody, you know what time it is. It's time to buckle up and play the biggest pot of the night. In this hand, an under the gun tight passive player limps. It folds around to me in the cutoff, and I look down at pocket 8s. I'm definitely going to raise it up here and try to take position against this under the gun limper, and I make it 8,500. At this point, blinds have gone up and around, and the blinds are now 2,000, 4,000, 4,000, and my stack is 61,000. The button calls and the big blind and the limper call, so we are going to go 4 ways to a flop of 8, 5, 7 with 2 spades. We flop top set, but this is a very wet and dynamic board. They check it over to me, and we don't want to bet too small. Even though this is a multi-way pot, this is a very dynamic board. We're going to get called by hands that contain a 6 in them and spade draws. So I'm trying to get my stack in. SPR is already getting a bit shallow, so I bet 20,000. The button, who has me covered, then snap rips all in. It folds around to me, and obviously we snap call, and here's what happened. My opponent had 8-5 of diamonds, so we absolutely cooler him having 2 pair, and he was drawing very, very slim. Our hand holds up, and now we have 141,500 chips, a great, great spot to be in nearing this money bubble to make a push at this final table. In this hand, blinds are 2,000, 4,000, 4,000. I have a stack of 150,000. The same loose passive player limps under the gun for 4,000, and it folds around to me in the cutoff, and I look down at Ace, Queen of spades. I raise to 10,000. The small blind then cold calls my raise, and the under the gun limper calls as well, so we go 3 ways to a flop of 10, 8, deuce with 2 spades, so we flop ourselves a massive combo draw with the nut flush draw in 2 overs. The small blind doesn't think long at all before just ripping all in for about 47,000. The under the gun player folds very quickly, and now obviously we have a snap call calling this bet of a little over 10 big blinds. Here's what happened. Unfortunately, we brick out the turn and the river, and we cannot get there, and we are actually a favorite against my opponent's holding with this combo draw, but we're going to lose a pretty decent pot and try to recoup. In this hand, blinds have gone up to 3,000, 5,000, 5,000, and I have a stack of 80,000, good for 16 big blinds. It folds around to me in the cutoff, and I look down at the beautiful King, Queen of hearts, and I min raise to 10,000. The small and big blind call, they both have me covered by a lot of chips. The flop is Ace, 10, deuce with 1 heart, so we flop ourselves a gutter and a backdoor flush draw. They check it over to me, and I think both of my opponents can contain some ace-x hands. However, a lot of times I can just bet small here on this ace-high board and take it down, so I bet 8,000. Only the small blind calls, so we are going to head to a turn card, which is the 5 of spades. My opponent checks it to me yet again, and now I don't have a lot of big blinds behind. I only have about 12 bigs. Again, we are nearing the soft bubbles, so I think playing the spot a little bit more passive is the correct way to play, and after reviewing this hand, I ended up seeing that I played the spot spot quote unquote perfectly, so I do check behind as we can still be ahead of a lot of my opponent's holdings. The river is the 9 of hearts, my opponent checks yet again, and now after taking this line, I can't rep much of anything, so I'm gonna check and hope that king high can be good here, and my opponent rolls over 9-8 of diamonds, so a little bit of an ambitious call on the flop there, but I guess that's why I bet small. When you down bet, you keep a lot of those types of hands in, so if I had more chips behind, I definitely would have pulled the trigger, but given my stack size and the position in the tournament, I decided to play it a little bit passive. A little unfortunate, but you know what, we're gonna have to move on to the next one. In this hand, I am in the big blind with exactly 10 big blinds behind. There's a raise from the cutoff and then a call, and I look down at ace queen in the big blind. We have a pure jam. The cutoff then makes the call. He has pocket tens, and here's what happened. Unfortunately, ace queen has not been kind to us today as we cannot win this race, and now we are out of the tournament.
Well, we needed ace queen to be our friend today, and it was not. 2 huge spots that probably most likely propel us to the final table and have a very, very high chance of cashing the tournament. So the biggest spots we needed today, we did not get there, and we were actually slightly ahead with the ace queen of spades versus the flopped king 10 top pair against my opponent. So anyway, we were in for 365, out for a big old goose egg, but had fun, learned a lot, had a blast. And anyway, if you guys enjoyed the vlog, would you do me a huge favor and go all in and like, comment, and subscribe? It would mean the world to me. We are just getting started. It's only up from here. And guess what, guys? I'm headed to go play some cash at Las Colinas, so you guys will see that on the next vlog. Also, don't forget to sign up for my brand new Poker Bros Club on Poker Bros. It's completely a free roll tournament club, so I'll be hosting weekly free rolls every week on there. I'll post the information on the screen. Well, anyway, I'm off to go play some cash at Las Colinas, which will be on the next vlog. I'll see you guys next time.